It starts with a phone that doesn't ring. On August 19th, 1991, the leader of the Soviet Union is suddenly unreachable, cut off inside a government dacha on the Black Sea coast in Crimea. No press, no calls, no orders leaving the building, just a strange stillness, like someone has pulled the plug on the most powerful office on Earth. And while he's isolated, Moscow wakes up to a different reality. Before breakfast, armored vehicles are already rolling, not on a foreign battlefield, on the boulevards of the capital. Tanks crawl past apartment blocks, soldiers stare straight ahead. Traffic slows to a crawl, not because of an accident, but because history has stepped into the street. On television, normal programming vanishes. In its place, stiff statements, official music, and eerie calm. The kind of broadcast that doesn't inform you, it warns you. People who lived through the Soviet system knew that tone. It meant the state was closing its fist. Within hours, millions of people realized something terrifying. The Soviet Union might be changing hands without a vote, without debate, without anyone asking. Most people remember what comes next. The USSR collapses, new flags rise, and the world's balance of power flips. But today, we're entering the narrower hallway that led to that outcome. Because for roughly 3 days, August 19th to August 21st, the end of the USSR was not guaranteed. For 3 days, there was a real chance the Soviet Union would survive, by force. And if that coup succeeds, if the men behind it manage to lock down the streets, control the story, and arrest the opposition, then the 1990s, the 2000s, and the world you live in now do not unfold the same way. This episode is not history fan fiction. We'll do it the way this channel is meant to do it. First, we reconstruct what actually happened, step by step, so you understand why the coup failed. Then, we take one controlled turn, the smallest believable change that lets it succeed, and we follow the consequences just far enough to reveal the survival lesson. Because the most dangerous disasters aren't always explosions. Sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes they're paperwork. Sometimes they're a government announcing an emergency while the phones stop working. This is the Soviet coup of 1991, the weekend the USSR almost reversed history. To understand why this coup almost worked, you have to understand what the Soviet Union looked like in 1991. On paper, it was a superpower, nuclear weapons, a vast military, and a state that had controlled life from the Baltic to the Pacific for decades. In reality, it was exhausted. The economy was breaking down. Shops were empty in many cities. Lines for basic goods were normal. The ruble was losing trust, and the system that once felt permanent, the Communist Party, the ministries, the security services, was fighting itself. Mikhail Gorbachev had tried to save the country with reform. He opened the press. He loosened censorship. He introduced elections. He reduced fear. But those reforms did something dangerous. They removed the glue that held a rigid system together. Suddenly, people could criticize. Suddenly, republics could demand more power. Suddenly, the Soviet Union wasn't one machine. It was 15 different arguments about what the future should be. By the summer of 1991, the biggest argument was about a new treaty. Gorbachev wanted a new union treaty that would keep the USSR together, but give the republics real autonomy. To reformers, it was the only way to prevent total collapse. To hardliners, it sounded like surrender, like dissolving the Soviet state from the inside. And they had a deadline. The treaty was scheduled to be signed within days. So, the plotters weren't trying to take power someday. They were trying to stop a clock. Because once that treaty was signed, the Soviet Union as they knew it would be gone. Not with a bang, but with signatures. That's why August 1991 became a weekend of panic inside the highest offices of the state. Not panic in the streets yet, panic behind doors.
We cannot wait for authorization. We're losing time. He knows we're coming.
The coup wasn't planned by strangers. It was planned by the people who already held the keys. They called themselves the State Committee on the State of Emergency, a name that sounds like bureaucracy, because bureaucracy is how you seize a country without announcing you're doing it. At the center were senior officials from the state's most powerful pillars. Two names tell you what kind of coup this was. Gennady Yanayev, the Soviet vice president, chosen to present the takeover as legal, and Vladimir Khrushchev, head of the KGB, chosen to make it enforceable. The group wasn't one ideology, it was one fear, that the Soviet Union was about to be signed out of existence. In a system like the USSR, that mattered more than popularity. You didn't need millions cheering in the streets, you needed three things. Control of communication. If you can control what people hear, you control what they believe is possible. Control of mobility. If you can control who can move, who can gather, who can travel, you can prevent resistance from becoming a crowd. Control of legitimacy. If you can make it look lawful, an emergency, a temporary measure, a medical situation, then half the country waits to see what the law says before it decides what it believes. That's why the plot begins not with gunfire, but with paperwork. A declaration, a statement, a leader who can't be reached. Then the muscle arrives. Armored vehicles in Moscow, interior forces positioned around key sites, and a message broadcast that tells citizens the state is still in control, whether it is or not. This is the heart of coup mechanics. You don't win by crushing everyone. You win by making everyone hesitate long enough for the new reality to settle. And in August 1991, that was the plan. Freeze the country, stop the treaty, and restore a Soviet Union that could still be ruled from the center. Now the question is how close they got. Early on August 19th, the coup announces itself the way a state announces weather. Not with shouting, with a calm voice telling you something has happened and you should remain orderly. Soviet television cuts away from normal programming. Newsreaders deliver the statement. The president is unavailable due to health reasons, and a state of emergency is being introduced. The tone is designed to do one thing. Don't move yet. Wait. We're in charge. At the same time, Moscow begins to fill with armor. Columns of tanks and armored personnel carriers roll toward key sites, government buildings, communications nodes, major intersections. Soldiers take positions that look temporary, but are designed to become normal if nobody challenges them. And for a moment, it works. A coup is not a single moment. It's a race between two forces. The plotters trying to make their takeover feel inevitable. The public trying to decide whether resistance is safe. In those first hours, most people do what coups depend on. They wait. They go to work. They listen to radio. They ask neighbors what's happening. They watch the street and try to calculate which side is stronger, because the wrong calculation can get you arrested, or worse. This is why controlling information is everything. The committee issues decrees, censorship rules return, public gatherings are restricted, newspapers are threatened, and the TV keeps repeating the same calm, unnerving message: emergency, stability, order. But there's a problem the plotters did not solve. They removed Gorbachev from the picture. They did not remove the person who could replace the picture. Boris Yeltsin, elected president of the Russian Republic, is still free, still in Moscow, still visible. And within hours, he begins to do the one thing that can break a coup at birth. He refuses to hesitate.
It can't be happening again.
By midday, Moscow feels like it's holding its breath. The tanks are real, the soldiers are real, the emergency statements are real. But the city's daily life hasn't fully stopped, and that contradiction makes everything more terrifying. People gather at corners and whisper. They stare at armored vehicles the way you stare at a storm you can't outrun. Some walk closer to read the mood on a soldier's face, because the face tells you more than the television does. And television now is the strangest part. In moments of crisis, people expect information. Instead, they get repetition, the same statement, the same official calm. It's not that the TV is silent, it's that it has stopped behaving like a window. It has become a wall. That's when crowds begin to form, not everywhere, only in the places where fear turns into action. Around the Russian Parliament building, the White House, people gather to protect it from being surrounded. They bring what they can: bodies, barricades, improvised defenses. Not because they believe they can defeat tanks, because they believe that if the tanks win the street, the coup becomes permanent. The military leadership faces a problem coups always create. What do you do when the public doesn't immediately submit? If you fire, you create martyrs and unify resistance. If you don't fire, the resistance grows. So the streets become a negotiation made of posture and nerves. Soldiers stand in formation. Citizens stand in front of them. Some climb onto armored vehicles to speak. Some hand flowers. Some argue. Most just watch, waiting for the first irreversible step. And above all of it is the question every person in Moscow is silently asking. Is this a show of force, or the beginning of a new Soviet state? Because once a coup convinces you it's permanent, it doesn't need to win every battle. It only needs you to stop imagining you can win any.
Look at the tanks, they are moving closer.
Every coup has a hinge, a moment where the story stops being a rumor and becomes a choice. In August 1991, that hinge is a man climbing onto a tank outside the White House. Boris Yeltsin does something the emergency committee didn't plan for. He turns visibility into legitimacy. He stands above the crowd, above the soldiers, above the confusion, and declares the takeover illegal, where cameras can capture it and people can repeat it. It's a direct attack on the coup's strongest weapon, which is not the tanks. It's the appearance of inevitability. Yeltsin's message is simple: do not cooperate. Do not obey illegal orders. Do not let the emergency become normal. And around him, something begins to shift. Some military units hesitate, not in the sense of fear, but in the sense of authority. A soldier can follow orders when the state is clear. A soldier hesitates when the state splits into two competing claims of legitimacy. That's why the image matters so much. A man on a tank isn't just symbolism. It's a signal to everyone watching that resistance exists and is organized, that the coup is not uncontested, that you are not alone if you refuse. And the signal travels fast, even in a controlled media environment. Word moves through crowds, through phone calls, through foreign broadcasts, through anything that isn't fully owned by the committee. This is how a coup begins to fail, not because it runs out of weapons, but because it runs out of compliance. Because coups are built on a temporary condition, the public's uncertainty. Once uncertainty flips into defiance, the plotters face a new clock. They must either escalate to violence or accept that the moment is slipping away. And on that day in Moscow, with cameras rolling and crowds growing, the committee does not take the step that would lock in their power. They pause. And in a coup, pausing is fatal. From the outside, the coup looks powerful. Tanks, decrees, television control. So why does it collapse by August 21st? Because a coup doesn't succeed by showing force. It succeeds by coordinating force, and the committee never achieves full coordination. First, they fail to control the symbol at the center. Gorbachev is isolated, but not erased. The longer he exists as a living reference point, the harder it is to claim a clean transfer of power. Second, they don't fully control communication. They dominate Soviet television, but they cannot seal every channel. Foreign broadcasts continue. Phone calls spread news. Crowds become their own media. And Yeltsin's defiance gives the story a center people can repeat. Third, they misjudged the military. They assumed the army would act like a single lever. Pull it, and the country moves. But armies are made of people, and people need clarity. Many commanders do not want to be responsible for blood in the streets, especially if they're not sure which government they'll be answering to next week. This hesitation becomes a chain reaction. Units wait for confirmation, orders soften, deadlines slip. The committee issues statements instead of decisive action, and every hour they choose caution, resistance grows. There are moments of violence, small, sharp, and dangerous, but not the overwhelming force the committee would need to break the standoff quickly. And without that decisive break, the coup remains what it was at the beginning, an emergency announcement, not a new state. Finally, the plotters themselves fracture. Some want escalation, some want negotiation, some want an exit. The committee is a coalition of fear, not a unified machine. So, by August 21st, the logic of the coup collapses. The military begins withdrawing from Moscow. The committee loses momentum. Officials begin switching sides, not because they suddenly become brave, but because they can feel which direction inevitability is now flowing. And once inevitability shifts, coups die fast. Because the coup's real fuel, public hesitation, has run out. Now we take the controlled turn. In the real timeline, the committee pauses. Units hesitate. Orders soften. The coup loses momentum. In this alternate reality, the committee makes one different decision early on. They don't wait for hesitation to resolve itself. They cut visibility. Instead of letting Yeltsin become a broadcast symbol, they isolate the White House area faster, block access roads, and choke the local communication corridors around the key sites: press access, transmitter reach, movement routes. Then they take the second step the real coup avoided. They arrest the visible leaders of resistance before the crowd becomes a crowd. Not with a dramatic raid for television, but with silent mechanics that feel like the system itself has turned predatory. A midnight knock, a sealed apartment door, aides who don't return, phones that suddenly go dead. By the morning of day 2, Moscow still has tanks. People still feel the tension. But the country does not have a single clear image of defiance to rally around. The committee announces temporary stability measures, curfews, checkpoints, emergency rules, written to be renewable. People are stopped and turned back with paper orders. Streets that were public yesterday become controlled spaces today. The press is tightened again. Key papers don't appear. Radios repeat official bulletins. The system stops explaining and starts instructing. And here's the most important consequence. The Soviet Union doesn't become strong again. It becomes rigid again. The republics see what this means. Some try to push independence faster before the door closes. Others freeze, waiting to see if Moscow will punish them. The outside world watches carefully, unsure whether it's witnessing collapse or re-hardening. Inside the USSR, ordinary people adjust the way humans always do when rules become dangerous. They stop speaking freely in public. They stop trusting the future. They start measuring words. The coup survives not by winning hearts. It survives by restoring fear as the organizing principle of daily life.
You must turn back.
And the final twist is this. Even in this successful coup timeline, the USSR is not saved. It is only postponed. Because you cannot rebuild a 1991 economy, a 1991 political union, and a 1991 national identity using 1970s control. You can only hold the seams together long enough for the next rupture to be worse. Here's the lesson of August 1991. Real timeline or alternate. Power doesn't always announce itself with explosions. Sometimes it arrives as an emergency. And an emergency doesn't win by convincing everyone. It wins by making everyone hesitate. That's why the most important battlefield in a coup is not the street. It's legitimacy. Who looks lawful? Who looks inevitable? Who looks like the future you'll be punished for resisting? In the real 1991 coup, the committee failed because it couldn't lock the system into one story fast enough. Communication leaked. The military hesitated. A visible center of resistance formed. And once hesitation turned into defiance, the coup ran out of fuel. In the alternate branch, the coup survives by cutting visibility and restoring fear, not because fear makes a state healthy, but because fear makes people quiet. So the survival lesson isn't be brave in a movie sense, it's this. Watch the early signals. When you see power trying to become permanent, it starts by controlling three things: information, movement, and legitimacy. If you understand those three, you understand the difference between a temporary crisis and a new normal. Next episode, we return to a different kind of invisible system, one you rely on every hour. And we ask, what happens when it fails? Subscribe. Because in alternate realities, we don't just retell history. We use it to recognize the shape of the next emergency before it arrives.